Hey guys, we're going to go over the study guide together like this. We'll consider this a way to not do the study guide if you would prefer, but at the very least, we'll do this as an entrance video. So we'll start with why was the lawmaking body created first? So the founders thought it was the most important, and they believed in representative government, and so they put it first and foremost in our Constitution. A bicameral legislature is a lawmaking body. That's the legislator part, made up of two houses. That's the bicameral part. So if it said unicameral, that would be one house legislator. The two houses of Congress are the Senate and the House of Representatives. I've told you before, but if there's one question I really want you to get right on this test, it's this one. I want you guys to leave my class at the very least knowing what the Senate and the House of Representatives are. Those are the two houses that make up our U.S. Congress, that make our laws. So why did the founders agree to a bicameral Congress? Well, a couple reasons. One was their experience in having a bicameral Congress in England with their upper and lower houses, but largely because of the Great Compromise. Combined the Virginia Plan and the New Jersey Plan, which the Virginia Plan supported population-based representation, and the New Jersey Plan, which wanted each state to have the same number of votes that would benefit the smaller states like New Jersey. Representatives from Connecticut came together and said, hey, why don't we do this compromise where we have a bicameral legislature where we can take elements of both of these plans. So sometimes it's called the Connecticut Compromise, sometimes it's called the Great Compromise. A congressional session is 1 year. A congressional term is every 2 years, and that's because there's turnover in Congress every 2 years. That's when our elections are. So we have a new Congress each time. We have 435 members in the House of Representatives. Ooh, I don't know what was happening there. We have 435 members of the House of Representatives. So in combining all of our states, we have 435 House reps. In order to be a House rep, you have to be 25 years old. So you guys are closest to being members of the House. You have to be a resident in the U.S. for 7 years prior to becoming a House rep. You have to be a legal resident of the state that elects you. So if you live in Ohio, you can be a representative of Ohio, but you cannot be a representative of New Jersey. The final restriction, that's the one I just shared. A House term is every 2 years. So every 2 years, you would have to run for re-election. So once you win the election, you get to be a House rep for 2 years, guaranteed. A census is a population count. We have those every 10 years in our country. And when we reassign representation based on population, after every census, we call that reappointment. States can gain or lose House representatives by gaining or losing population as a percentage of the country as a whole. So if Ohio is 10% of the population of the United States, which it's not even close to that, but if it were 10% of the population of the United States, then after the next census, it had gone up to 20%, then all of a sudden we would double our number of House reps. The process of redrawing and resetting those district lines after reappointment is called redistricting. Doing that to a political advantage is called gerrymandering. So after the census, we decide, okay, Ohio had 18 House reps. Now they only should have 16 House reps because their population went down. So we're going to redraw their lines so there's 16 districts. And if we are, let's say the Republican Party, the Democratic Party in power, and we get to redraw them and we draw them to our own advantage, that part would be gerrymandering. Now, senators. Every state has 2 senators, no matter how big or small the state is. There are 100 senators in total, because we got 50 states, 2 senators from each state. In order to be a senator, you have to be 30 years old. So You have to be a little bit older to be a senator than a House rep. Consider that like the importance of that single position or the prestige of that single position. House rep, you have to be 25. Senator, you have to be 30. To be president, you have to be 35. They go by 5 years. In order to be a senator, you have to live and be a citizen of the United States for 9 years prior, and you have to be a resident of the state that you are representing, just like for the House reps. When you get elected as a senator, you get that position for 6 years. You have 6-year terms. Now, it can be a little confusing because we elect senators every 2 years, but that's only 1/3 of them. So every 2 years, 33 senators come up for election. But if you win your Senate seat, you don't come up for election for 6 years. So we stagger them that way. Censure is a vote of formal disapproval of a member's action. So this is a way that they can reprimand a senator or congressional person without fully removing them. There are non-voting delegates in the House of Representatives from other countries, specifically the ones that are territories of the United States, American Samoa, Virgin Islands, Guam, Puerto Rico, DC. All of these places have delegates or representatives in the House of Representatives. They just can't officially vote. So that part's true. Incumbents, or people who are already in office, win re-election about 90% of the time, and in some cases way higher than that, like in the House of Representatives. So an incumbent is a person who's already in office, and they have a very good chance of staying in office each time they run. Each House of Congress decides their own rules. So they set up and write their rules every 2 years when they get a new Congress. In the House of Representatives, those rules are typically geared towards moving legislation quickly once it reaches the floor. They have so many people in the House of Representatives, they want things to move more efficiently than they would in the House. The leaders in the House of Representatives have more power than the leaders in the Senate as far as what goes on within their chamber. So in the House of Representatives, the leaders can decide who's in what committee and what legislation gets put forward and stuff like that. Most of the work in Congress gets done within committees, and that's to streamline and make things a lot easier. It would be too hard to have every congressional member do every single job. And so we can break it up into committees. It makes things a lot more efficient. And that's why things are more important in the House of Representatives. Committees are more important in the House of Representatives. There's 435 of them. You've got all this legislation. If you were to have all 435 voting members work on every piece of legislation, it would take forever. So we break it into committees, and that makes things a lot easier. Now, representatives have what are called constituents. Constituents are people who are being represented. So if you are a representative of a specific district, all of those people that you represent in that district are your constituents. Doesn't matter if they voted for you or not, you are representing those people. So some of the powers that the majority party has in each house would be like selecting leaders, determining the flow of the legislation, and appointing committee chairs. The presiding officer of the House of Representatives is the Speaker of the House, and that's chosen by the majority party through a caucus. And remember, a caucus is a closed meeting. The party would get together and determine who will be their speaker, who will be the leader for the party for that session of Congress. The Speaker's top assistant is the majority leader, and they have a lot of similar duties. There's also a whip. That is a position that is an assistant floor leader in the House. Their job is to help get legislation through, make sure everyone's on the same page. A bill is a proposed law. So a law prior to getting passed by the houses and signed into actual law is called a bill. After the bill survives the committee process, remember it goes into the hopper if it's in the House of Representatives or it's presented in Senate. It goes to its appropriate committee, which is also determined by the majority party. But after it makes it through the committee process, debate, discussion, rewriting, all that, it goes onto the calendar. And that's a really big deal because if it goes really far back in the calendar, it might never get voted on potentially. Or it could go really close up, really early on in the calendar, and it could be getting through relatively fast. The oldest and most powerful committees is the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee determines the flow of the major legislation. It decides where on the calendar it's going to go. Remember, a quorum is the minimum number of members who have to be present to permit a legislative body for taking official action, whether that's a vote or having an official meeting. You have to have this minimum number, which is usually at least half. So you think of it as if all but one or two people are missing from your class, there's a good chance your teacher might not have class that day. You'll have to do something else instead because you don't have a quorum. And the same thing goes on in Congress. And when we watch Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, you'll get to see them talk about quorum. The rules in the Senate are different than the rules in the House. The rules in the Senate are more flexible, and they are made to make sure that all senators have the maximum freedom to express their ideas. The presiding officer of the Senate is the Vice President, rather than the Speaker of the House in the House of Representatives. The most important leaders in the Senate are the majority and the minority leader. Those are the names you hear most often in the news. Those are the people who have the most power and positions. So it's not the vice president, even though the vice president is the presiding officer. The people who have the most power are the majority and the minority leader. The name of the calendar that contains the schedule of the bills is called the Calendar of General Orders. The filibuster, which we hear about in the news all the time, the filibuster is to purposely stall legislative process and prevent a vote ultimately. So it's to stall. I always give the example of you have a test in class and you come in and you're like, I really am not ready or don't want this test to happen. I'm going to filibuster. I'm going to talk to the teacher, get the teacher off topic, try to delay whatever I can, and maybe we want to take the test. Well, legislators do the same thing in their respective house, particularly in the Senate where you have where you can do that more easily and delay a vote on something, maybe even entirely prevent a vote on something. Now, there's also cloture. Cloture is a limiting of the amount of time that senators can speak on specific bills. And that's basically to stop the filibuster. So when people talk about ending the filibuster, usually what they're talking about is lowering the amount of vote needed in order to have cloture. So we have 4 types of committees. We have standing committees, select committees, joint committees, and conference committees. The standing committees are the permanent committees that continue from one Congress to the next, and they can have several subcommittees within them. So those are the ones you hear about most often, whether it's the Rules Committee, or Agriculture, Education, stuff like that. Select committees are temporary committees on specific issues. Think of issues that are really important to the American people or Congress right at that moment. So whether it's a coronavirus task force or something like that, you could have a committee on a specific issue for a specific amount of time. Those are select committees. Joint committees are ones that are made up of both the House and the Senate, and they usually act as like study groups. They get together, they talk about things, they study things, they work on things together, and then they go back to their house and talk to those representatives about what they learned and came up with. And then finally, we have our conference committees, which are also made up of members of both the House and the Senate, but specifically when they pass different versions of the same bill. If they're going to pass some sort of education bill and the House wants something and the Senate has a similar bill, but maybe it's just slightly different, the amount of money is different or something like that, they'll come together in a conference and decide on one version of that bill that will go to both houses to get voted on. We have two different types of support staff. We have personal support staff and committee staff. Now, personal, just like it sounds, are staff members who work directly with specific representatives. So a senator will have their own staff that works with them. That would be a personal staff. Then we have committee staff, and those would be people who work with specific committees, whether that's some sort of education committee or something like that. These are not the representatives, but staff that works for the committee. And then on your test, I'm going to ask you for one support agency. I gave you 4 here. There's more than that out there, but there are 4 right here. One's the Library of Congress. They provide information and research for Congress. There's a Congressional Budgeting Office, which just like it sounds, budgets for Congress. We have the Accounting Office, which does all the accounting for Congress and all of the arms of Congress. And then finally, the Government Printing Office, which does all of the printing, just like it sounds, for the entire federal government.